Hey everyone, it's Adam. Welcome to yet another What's New in MixEffect. Today we're going to cover MixEffect 1.8.0. Been a while since I released an update to MixEffect, and there's a lot to cover, so let's get started. We're going to cover the new compatibility with the ATEM Television Studio HD8, followed by some new features, reposition in box for SuperSource and DVE, and shortcut macros. So you're going to really like these two new features. Then I'm going to cover the HTTP feedback system along with the updated MixEffect module for Companion 3.0. Then I'm going to go over some minor updates to the counter overlay, some new shortcuts and OSC actions, the simulator banner, a couple global keyboard shortcuts for recording and streaming. I'm going to go through a list of bug fixes. So first up, ATEM Television Studio HD8 and HD8 ISO support. That's quite a mouthful. So Blackmagic released these two new switchers a couple weeks ago, and thanks to the help of some people in the community, because I don't have a loaner yet from Blackmagic Design, might get one in April, but I've brought preliminary compatibility with the new switchers. They won't have support for things like the new audio routing in the HD8 and HD8 ISO, but you'll be able to do everything. The SuperSource, controlling the switcher, all the things that you're used to in controlling other ATEM switchers you'll get in the HD8. Okay, let's talk about reposition in box. So what is this? This is the ability to reposition the input source within a box or SuperSource or the DVE. This takes the guesswork out of tinkering with the position X and Y and the crop top, left, bottom, and right values. You just kind of touch and drag and the video source repositions. So size is not supported, but you can just reposition the things in the boxes. So let's actually do a demo of this. So I'm going to go to the DVE right here, and you can see my iPad is on the recording. I'm going to switch to the upstream keyer, which you can see here. Now, we have the lock icon for the DVE, and when you unlock it, there's a new icon. Looks like this little double arrow thing. That's the reposition in box icon. When you tap on this, you can move the video source around in the box, and it will stay fixed. For the most part, I'll tell you the caveat in a second. And then when you stop, the video source will be put back in place. So I'm going to go move my own head around. You can see it moving around like this, and I can reposition it exactly how I want. So if I want like my little keyboard in the background, I can just like reposition myself like that and do it like that. And now I'm kind of centered a little bit better for the DVE. Or if I want to just center myself again, I can just tap and drag myself where I want to be. If I want to center it just like that. Okay? And this works for the DVE and the flying key. And if we go to SuperSource, go back to SuperSource here, and I'm going to go to this one here. So these are two SuperSource boxes. We have box 1 is the camera, the 5D Mark IV, and box 2 is the iPad. So let's say I actually had cropped box 1. So I'm going to go set this one to box number 1. And I'm going to make this one, say, let's make it a square. Okay, so now my box 1 is a square, and I'm going to add a little crop to the bottom and to the top. So it kind of looks like that right now. Okay, and I'll make it a little bigger just for good measure. So if I wanted to reposition this video in the frame, I would, again, I'm in locked mode. I unlock and I get the reposition and in box button right here in the upper right hand corner of the visual editor. And now I can tap the SuperSource and you can see the box and you can see a preview of the crop margins that showed up. And then I can reposition it like that. So again, if I wanted to focus on the keyboard in the background and my head, I can do just like that. Now I have to kind of center myself, make sure I'm in the camera. But as you can see, this is what it looks like. So this is the reposition in box feature. Now there's one caveat with using reposition in box with the DV and the flying key. MixEffect needs to send a lot of commands to the ATEM to change its X and Y position, also the mask top, right, left, and bottom to the ATEM every time you're tapping and dragging the flying key or the DV around. Sometimes the sync between MixEffect and the Blackmagic ATEM switcher kind of get out of sync. And sometimes that results in the position of the box changing slightly, or the position or the size of the box changing slightly. And it's very, very slight for the size, and sometimes the position gets it's pretty significant. So I'm going to try to demonstrate it right now. I'm going to tap here, and I'm going to move this around. So keep your eye on the position of the DVE box. Let's center it like that. That looks pretty good. But if I kind of like drag it around a lot, let's see, get it pretty out of position. So far, so good. But your mileage may vary as you use repositioned rocks. So just keep that in mind when you're using it for the DV or the flanky. You may need to do some fine tuning adjustments over here in the position X and Y. Maybe adjust the mask slightly. This doesn't seem to be a problem when you're using reposition in box with the SuperSource, but just wanted you to know about that. So what's next is shortcut macros. This is a really exciting addition to MixEffect. So what are shortcut macros? Basically, you can run iOS or macOS shortcuts when you run an ATEM macro. There's two types of shortcut macros. There's a manual shortcut macro and an auto shortcut macro. So what's the difference between the two? A manual shortcut macro is a macro that runs a shortcut whenever you initiate the shortcut from MixEffect. So if I'm in the MixEffect app right now, and I go to the macro section, and let's just say I go to search for right here. I have a macro here called VFA work color. And then I've added a note for it, which has a special prefix, MS colon, and then the name of the shortcut that's on this iPad. So in this case, this is running a manual shortcut, MS, VFA work color. And then if you want to do an auto shortcut, that's AS colon, and then the name of the shortcut. So again, a manual shortcut is something that's run when you tap on the shortcut or the macro in MixEffect. An auto shortcut is a shortcut that runs when the ATEM, when MixEffect detects when the ATEM is running a macro. So you could have a multiple series of controllers controlling your ATEM. You could have ATEM software control, BitFocus companion, another, an iPad or an iPhone running MixEffect. A lot of ways to run the macros, or you can actually push the physical button on the ATEM switcher itself. And an auto shortcut macro detects when the ATEM is running the macro, and then it will run the shortcut associated with it. So you can think of examples where you would want to push a button on the physical ATEM, and then you want to run an iOS or macOS shortcut from the iPad automatically. And other times you might want to run the shortcut only on the device that you have. Okay, so you just want to run it on this iPad right here and not have it when you push buttons on the ATEM or run a macro from another place. So let's see what happens. Now, the first thing we need to do is we need to enable the macro, shortcut macros. And the way you do that, there's two ways to do that. So the first way is you need to go into settings, automations, and you want to tap enable shortcut macros right here. Okay. The next thing you need to do is you need to enable shortcut macros on each switcher connection that you're going to run shortcut macros. So in this case, I have this ATEM mini extreme entry here, and we have enable shortcut macros right here. So you need to enable it also on the switcher connection. Think of the automation setting as a global toggle for this particular iOS device, and then your switchers are shared across all your iCloud enabled devices. So this is a shared setting. So if you don't want shortcut macros to run on this, disable it from automations. So now let's take a look at this shortcut macro that I have. Again, I have another one here, VFA work relaxing, and it calls a shortcut called VFA work relaxing. So we take a look at what those are. This is the shortcuts application right here. And I'm going to look like this. And it's going to actually call an H2R graphics API, HTTP API to hide some type of graphic. You'll see that in a second. And then it sets a HomeKit scene called work relaxing, which is going to change the lights in this room. And if we take a look at the VFA work color, we have set the work color HomeKit scene and also call this H2R graphics API to show a particular graphic. So let's actually see what happens when we run these macros. So I'm going to keep the shortcuts application here in split view, or actually slide overview, and I'm going to push this button right now. So you can see it turned on the lights to kind of like this warm color in the office. Now I'm going to turn on VFA work color. Okay, and it turned the lights back to purple, and you saw it brought in the H2R graphics uh, overlay, the ATEM MixEffect lower thirds down in the bottom left-hand corner. So if I run this VFA work relaxing shortcut again, shortcut macro, it runs the macro, which actually does nothing. It's a blank macro. But then it instructs MixEffect to run the shortcut, which removes the lower third and changes the lights in the room. I'm going to go back to this, work color, and bring back my lower thirds like that. So let's go over some examples of using shortcut macros. The first one I'm going to do is video follows audio and lighting. Let's take a look at my demo here. I have VFA enabled for microphone 1 and master audio, although I've turned off video follows audio at the moment. Let's take a look at those. So I'm going to tap on this one. This one's basically if the audio levels are less than 50 decibels, sample size of 294, switch to the 5D Mark IV, and then run the macro VFA work relaxing. The mic 1 audio levels are greater than minus 35.7 decibels, sample size of 45. It will also set to the 5D Mark IV, and it's going to run the VFA work color shortcut. So let's take a look at what happens here. I'm going to turn on VFA right now, and I'm going to keep talking because the audio levels are above 50 decibels. It's actually going to keep the run that shortcut, and you saw that the lower third came on, ATEM MixEffect. And I kept the lights the same because I'm already using these purple lights right now. But if I stop talking for a few moments, the lights change and the audio source changes to the 5D Mark IV directly, not in SuperSource, and it removes the lower third. Now, if I keep talking like this, it's going to set the scene back to purple and bring in the lower thirds. So again, what's happening in the shortcut is that it is setting the scene, work color, and then it's calling an API to H2R graphics to show this lower thirds. And if I stop talking, it's going to run the first is going to call H2R graphics and tell it to remove the lower thirds, and then it's going to run the work relaxing scene, which is going to turn the lights back to kind of this warm color. So again, I'm going to stop talking for a few moments. And you see the lights change. And there's a hold on the master audio to hold for like 10 seconds, which is why it isn't changing back to purple immediately. So that is the video follows audio with shortcut macros, controlling lights and lower thirds all at the same time. It's a pretty powerful feature, and I think you can get really creative with this feature. So I'm looking forward to seeing what you come with it. Okay, the next one is SuperSource preset buttons. So I have a couple SuperSource presets. Take a look at them right now on my iPad. And we're going to see configure for gaming. So this one is going to run a shortcut called configure AMP, which is the ATEM Mini Pro for gaming. So let's go take a look at what that does. This is actually controlling multiple ATEM switchers at a time, not the SuperSource preset buttons. So I'm going to take a look at this particular shortcut. Search for configure AMP for gaming. And what this is going to do is going to send an OSC message to my iPhone that's running MixEffect, that's communicating with the ATEM Mini Pro. So this iPhone right here. Okay. So when I push this button, it's going to configure all my sources. And I actually don't want to do this because I'm recording this video right now and I don't want to configure this. But when I push this, it's going to instruct my iPhone that's running MixEffect, talking to the ATEM Mini Pro, to run another macro on the ATEM Mini Pro to configure its sources. Because I have an ATEM Mini Extreme that has 8 inputs, but I really have, 12 inputs that I want to deal with. So I use an ATEM Mini Pro to give me some extra inputs. Actually, I think it only gives me 3 extra inputs, so a total of like 11. And that's what I use the ATEM Mini Pro for. So when I run this particular shortcut and macro on my ATEM Mini Extreme, it's just configuring the ATEM Mini Extreme. But I also want to configure the settings on the ATEM Mini Pro. I could have created a companion button that did this. But if you don't have companion or don't want to use companion, you can use shortcut macros to do that. So that's controlling multiple ATEM switchers using MixEffect shortcut macros. And then the final thing is SuperSource preset buttons. So on the ATEM Mini Extreme, you have 6 macro buttons, 1 through 6, that correspond to macros 1 through 6. So you can configure over here again, you just tap this, if this is a SuperSource button that you want to do, you can create a manual shortcut or an auto shortcut. Actually, you have to do an auto shortcut that runs a SuperSource preset. So this one could be AS colon and then the name of a preset. So I have presets here. That a bunch of them. I have this one called 4-grid preset. Okay. So if I configured, say, let's cancel this, and let's just go look for my preset button that I did, 4-grid. Okay. Now this one is bound to macro number 82. Again, if I put it on 1 through 6 and actually physically push the button on the ATEM switcher, it would run this preset. So let's actually see what happens when I run this. I'm going to actually run this from my ATEM, from my iPhone that's also connected to now to the ATEM Mini Extreme. I'm going to tap macros. I'm going to look for a grid. Okay. Now, because this is an auto shortcut, this MixEffect is going to detect when I push the macro and it's going to run the 4-grid. It's going to be a little weird what happens, but you'll get the point. So I'm going to push this button here. And then it just ran the shortcut to change the preset here. So again, if you have macro buttons 1 through 6, you can bind them to a shortcut and does something like a super preset, or maybe show a lower third. Pretty cool. Okay, so let's go back to demo here. Back to the presentation. So again, that is shortcut macros. We talked a lot about that, but it's actually a really powerful feature. I'm looking forward to seeing the type of shortcut macros that you create. Now, some caveats. If you have auto shortcuts enabled, very important, you probably don't want to have multiple copies of MixEffect that have shortcut macros enabled running at the same time. Because what will happen is that all the copies of MixEffect that have shortcut macros enabled for that switcher connection are going to run if you have auto shortcuts turned on, or if you're using auto shortcuts. So you should be careful if you have auto shortcut calling a SuperSource preset and you have like 2 copies of MixEffect. Both copies of MixEffect are going to try to do the preset, and so you may get some jittering and stuttering in your SuperSources. If you're calling like web APIs to like show lower thirds, it probably is okay to call them twice. But if you're doing things where you want to make sure that only one thing happens, you should probably have just one copy of MixEffect that is processing these shortcut macros. So again, you can turn off in automations the enable shortcut macros on all the copies of MixEffect that don't need to actually run. Or you can just use manual shortcuts and then they'll just run on the device that you're tapping, launching the macros from. So keep that in mind. There's more information in the documentation that's been updated at docs.mixeffect.app. All right, HTTP feedback server and the MixEffect module for Companion 3.0. So before I had this OSC companion feedback system, but I've replaced it with this HTTP one. So it will work with the upcoming MixEffect module for Companion 3.0. Basically, when you turn it on, it exposes an HTTP server where you can get feedback, which is basically the state of the ATEM at any given moment in time. You can also filter what data is returned, because actually there's quite a lot of data that's returned, by adding a filter query parameter, and you can add all those little comma delimited list items there. You want to just filter on just a particular thing. So now the companion module is being updated. It's going to work with Companion 3.0 beta. So right now what happens with BitFocus and Companion is that they are essentially moving forward with Companion 3.0 and kind of stopping development on Companion 2.4, which is probably what most people are using. So they're encouraging developers to upgrade their modules which will not be backward compatible to the 3.0 code base of Companion. And so with the help of some fantastic people in the community, I've been able to get the module updated for 3.0. This is going to bring a lot of new features, including variables and feedback. So you'll finally be able to have a switcher interface here that correctly shows which source is on program and which source is on preview. And eventually I'll have updated MixEffect companion profiles for the ATEM Mini Pro and the ATEM Mini Extreme and Mini Extreme ISO soon. How to get companion module is you can currently get it from GitHub repo right there. And you can install that file or that folder into your developer modules folder for Companion 3.0. And you won't need to do this once the team at Companion integrates this MixEffect module into their Companion 3.0 betas. But right now, you need to download the module and install it. Again, Companion 3.0 is not compatible with Companion 2.4, the modules. So if you still rely on a lot of different modules in Companion 2.4 right now, continue using that. And when Companion 3.0 is finally released with all of the developer modules supported, then you can upgrade to that. Okay, video follows audio improvements. I already mentioned and showed a demo of the shortcut macros in video follows audio. The run macro VFA triggers, there was a bug where they ran more than once. So now they will only run once per trigger. So, and then they'll reset every time another VFA trigger has occurred. So you'll make sure that the macro only runs once. I've adjusted the sample size algorithm so it does more accurate triggering after the VFA hold is removed. So basically, when VFA hold is initiated, so that means a VFA trigger has fired, the other audio input sources will basically be put on pause so that when the hold is lifted, they'll start collecting their samples and then they'll analyze the audio levels coming in for that audio source. And then when it reaches a certain threshold, then it will trigger again. Finally, I've increased the sample size for the master and input audio sources to 500 and 300 respectively. That means you can create a longer delay by which you have to collect more audio samples before the VFA trigger is fired for the master and input sources. Okay, time of day counter overlay. So if you have an ATEM Constellation HD or one of the new ATEM Television Studio HD8 or HD8 ISO, you have this counter overlay feature, which overlays a counter on output number 1 of the ATEM. So what I've added is a simple little button that's time of day, and you can press it to toggle between 24-hour and 12-hour times. So basically, it will show the current time, 12-hour or 24-hour format, and then you can use that as a countdown or a count up in your presentations on output number 1. This was a feature request from a user, and it was pretty easy to implement, so there you go. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about, grab bag of improvements. So there's some new automation additions, shortcut action to delete media, and have improved the change switcher section to support HyperDex, view all presets, and the run in background section if you're running iOS 16. In OSC, we have delete clip and delete still actions. I've added global keyboard shortcuts for starting and stopping a recording and streaming. So if you just hold down Command Option Shift Control R, that will toggle on and off recording, and Command Option Shift Control S will toggle on and off streaming. The simulator banners. This is a very simple little addition. When you're running the ATEM simulator in MixEffect, you'll see a purple banner. Now, why have I added this purple banner? A lot of people, when they're first starting to use MixEffect, they sometimes accidentally put in the IP address of MixEffect itself. So they ask me this support question. It's like, I have an ATEM Mini Pro, ATEM Mini Extreme, and I plug in the thing, and I'm seeing this ATEM Production Studio 4K. And I push the buttons and nothing's happening. What's happening? And I write back to them, oh, you're connected to the simulator. So this will be an easy way for people to self-diagnose the problem. If they tap on the little simulator icon at the very top of the banner, they'll be taken to the simulator documentation page at docs.mixeffect.app. And hopefully this will reduce some of the support requests because I'll instruct them to go to the connection help page on the documentation, and they can kind of figure out what the problem is and get MixEffect working to connect to their real ATEM, not to the simulator. Finally, some bug fixes. So there's the upstream keymode Luma settings were not being updated properly when they were changed outside of MixEffect. That's been fixed. Got a bug report from a user that the RGB sliders and color pickers weren't converting to HSL values properly. The ATEM uses HSL, hue, saturation, and luminance, and they weren't being converted when you're using the RGB sliders and the color pickers. So that's been fixed. There was a crash if you were using the HTTP feedback system already. Very few people were using that, but now I'm using a serial queue to stop that crash from happening. Flying key settings are more consistent with what you see in ATEM software control from Blackmagic on the Mac or PC. And finally, I found a way to prevent a crash when scrolling through the switcher section when in portrait mode if you're using MixEffect on an iPhone. So there you go. Those are all the features, bug fixes, and improvements in MixEffect 1.8.0. This is a long video. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy using Reposition in Box and SuperSource macros. Drop a line in the comment thread below, and if you haven't subscribed, you can do so by clicking the subscribe button down below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.